Cool Serotonin Comedown, a medley of microfixions. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. Madam Moonbeam lets him in. She'll read his palm. She'll track his lifeline. He needs to know. Is there any hope looking forward? Was Vicky even still alive? Madam Moonbeam conjures the storm with her pagan spells and wraps him in a cloak of darkness. We enter the charmed circle, she tells him. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. Our hero has no alibi. He faces the electric chair. At the last minute, his beau, Clarissa, confesses. She killed the mailman. They electrocute her instead. It is tragic. Our hero cries for Clarissa, who pledges eternal love. Shattered, broken, bereft, he seeks a new life in America and buys tickets on the ocean liner, HMS Titanic. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door, then another, then another. "All right, I'm coming," I yell out. I am just at that moment about to solve 17 down in my crossword. Flamboyant show starts with an R. Knock, 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 knock. 10 letters. The last letter is possibly Z. Razzmatazz. It fits. Now I can face the world. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. It is a man selling bad behaviour. "I've got a tantrum, blind rage, and an impatient foot stomp," he says. "Do you have any slam the door in your face?" I ask. "No," he says, checking in his bag. "Well, you do now," I tell him. Slam the door in his face. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. It is a man doing a rare Mongolian love chant. When he fails to receive the customary reply, he pulls out his scimitar, intent on hacking off his own humiliation. But the stormy night raged, and Namuna, the lady of the house, invited him for hot tea with rancid yak butter, and he is soothed, and they spend the evening singing songs about famous horses. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. "This is the police," yells a voice. "Come out with your hands up and all your Elvis LPs spread out neatly on the floor." "Quick," I say to Janice. "They're after the Elvis records. Get rid of them." She sneaks out the back and throws them in a dumpster, but she can't bring herself to throw away the 1973 release, Aloha from Hawaii. It was the king in his prime. There was Impossible Dream, Are You Lonesome Tonight, all these hits. The cops find it, and we're goners. It's always that one album, that one LP you can't part with, that brings you undone. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there's a knock at the door. It's a man from the Weather Bureau. "Storm warning," he says. "You're a bit late," I say, looking out at the maelstrom. "It's a dark and stormy night. You could have warned us yesterday." "Cutbacks at the Bureau," he says. "It's all this artificial intelligence. It hallucinates. Even after the storm hit, it was saying it is surf weather." And I invite him in, and we commiserate on the dreadful state of the world. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there's a knock at the door. It's my best friend Neville. "I can't stand it anymore," he cries. "I have to tell you, I've been having an affair with Tanya for the last 6 months." I'm shocked. 6 months, I say. "Then who was she having an affair with before that?" "I know all about you and Susan," he then says to me. "All right," I say. I confess. "It's been going on for a year." 2 years, he says. "No," I say. "Only 1. "Then who was she having an affair with the year before that?" "Come in," I say. "Let's try to work this out." Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there's a knock at the door. It's a party of Swedes on a pub crawl. We're looking for the Whaleback Inn, they explain. We're lost. Why, asks the man of the house, has Sweden given up its position of geopolitical neutrality and surrendered to the belligerence of the Eurocrats in Brussels? And he refuses to help and shuts the door. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door, and, uttering, as once the river did, a great partition of thunder just at that moment coinciding, it seems as though there is a giant knocking, with thudding fists, who, as he steps down from the black sky, dragging his bad leg, has collected gnarls of purple dark cumulus with which to thump on all the doors along the coast, for reasons the earth understands, but men never will. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. It's their drug dealer. You're not going to believe this, he says, but my dog ate the stash. He brings in the dog. He can hardly stand up. Everyone is glum. They sit and watch the dog stagger around the lounge room, then lay down with its feet in the air, and they all agree it looks like good stuff. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. When snoozeless Tony opens it, the storm clears, the sun rises, and angels sing hallelujah. What happened, he says, looking around. Am I dead? No, says a voice. But you sent a card to your Aunt Lil when she was sick, and when your cousin Terry was giving her trouble. It's the little things that count. He goes back to bed after that, gives the dog a pat, and sleeps easy. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. It's Socrates. It's the wife, he says. I'm wondering if you can put me up for the night. Only, I say, if you can answer my question. Is there a form of the storm? Typically, he answers with a question. Is there a core of the door, he asks. And this time we are once upon, isn't it true that it's a slippery fish, and wherever you try to grab it, it goes slimy? The storm front wavers at the cove. And yet, he says, delighting in the paradox, if there was no form of the storm, there would be no thunder. And he farts to prove his point. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. Foolishly, I open it. It is the wind. The storm pushes through, spits on my carpet, and throws all my mail on the floor. Do you mind, I say? But a badly timed, ill-tempered tempest resents a tidy lounge room. Sometimes a knock at the door ruffles your space and renders your life suddenly unkempt. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. It is two men. One sets his wares up on the coffee table and demonstrates the latest range of marital devices and sex toys. It is great fun as they wriggle and buzz, blushes and rude laughter. Meanwhile, the other man goes from room to room, stealing every valuable he can lay his hands on. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. Our hero sees the writing on the wall and climbs out the bathroom window. Now he is a fugitive. He'll have to go to South America. He'll never see his daughter again. There will be plastic surgery, fake passports. He makes his way to the jetty. The storm has torn his boat from its mooring, and it drifts 10 feet from the riverbank, filling up with rain. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. I went to the door. There was no one there. There was once a knock on a sunny morning too, and there was no one there. These knocks come in all weather, all times of the day. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. It is my beloved Laurel. She impersonates a rain cloud. I am sodden, she declares, with this blaring incipience. It begins. And what begins then is elemental. It draws ions from the air. She bathes in the darkness, and lightning strikes are like the sky taking photographs of her dancing. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. The events that led up to this happened long, long ago and far, far away. Adventures, battles, narrow escapes, monsters, betrayals, oracles, sacrifices, journeys across great oceans. No man knows the pain, the belittlement, the sting of self-doubt. Can I help you, I ask? I'm looking for number 47, the stranger explains. This is 49, I say. You want next door. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door, and when I opened it, in came a barrage of new beginnings. The best one involved a woman with a cat, and a farm, and a horse, and a long bus ride to see a waterfall, and crossing the slippery river with our pants rolled up to our knees. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. It's Steve's younger brother, Dave. Good news, he says, quickly coming in from the rain-soaked porch landing. The wicked witch of the West is dead. It means their stepmother, Shirley. She died in prison. It was a pity she wasn't in for what she had actually done. Her brother, Bullhead, always her defender, says that Steve and Dave are not welcome at the funeral. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. It is Jimmy Seville and Charles Mountbatten. What can I do for you two? I ask. People are saying horrid things about Jimmy, says Charles. Maybe you could write a story about what a funny guy he is. Maybe, I say. Tell me a joke, Jimmy. And Jimmy tells me the joke about the evil little man with friends in high places, the one with the punchline that goes, and no one even guessed. Charles rolls on the floor laughing. You see, he says, Jimmy is a funny guy. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. It's Salty the sailor. Avast, he cries. The Kraken wakes, pointing out at the storm-ridden waters. I step out into the weather. The wind is fierce, the rain is savage. It takes a level 6 storm surge to wake the Kraken, I say. This feels like a level 4 to me. There, cries Salty, there in the belly of the sea. Whatever is in the belly of the sea has been regurgitated 100 times, I assure him. But as if the ocean and the sky are conspiring to convince me, at that moment it starts raining fish. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. It is a magic door. It might be anyone and anything. It might be a black unicorn, an Arab explorer, a Chinese jazz singer, an opal miner, the cousin of Alexander the Great, Winston Churchill with a ukulele. It isn't. It's a young Indian guy named Raja selling subscriptions to a new movie service as a way to pay his way through medical school. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there's a knock at the door. It's Les Ferret from Les Ferret and the Marauders. Rod, he says, my career has gone to shit. Get rid of the drum machine, Les, I say. Then he has 3 hits in a row. I sue for royalties. My lawyer says it comes under contract tort, but is verbal and will be difficult to prove in court. Anyone might have said, get rid of the drum machine, Les. Were there any witnesses to prove it was me? It was one of those dark and stormy nights, I said. It was just me and Les. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there's a knock at the door. It's Tony Blair. He has a bottle of wine and has just dropped in for a social visit. Then I wake up in a cold sweat. It's the worst nightmare I've ever had. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door and a terrible advent falls. Please, doctor, it's a matter of life and death, pleads the woman from the village. But I'm not that type of doctor, I say. She pleads with me. Tears are cascading over her cheeks. I have a doctorate in urban planning. It's tonight it looks like I'm going to try my hand at heart surgery. Once upon a time on a dark and stormy night there is a knock at the door. Naked, their lips pressed together, their fingers clawing, they ignore it. There is a further knock. She moans like a cattle truck. Shh, shh, he says, stopping. It could be them. She rolls aside and listens. If it is, she says, remember, you're a friend of Barry's. You used to play golf together. I don't know anything about golf, he says. Make it up, she says. Tell them how you hit a hole-in-one. Once upon a time on a dark and stormy night there was a knock at the door. Phillips was expecting Brown. It was Henshaw. Where's Cooper? With Smith. Did he kill Morris? And Fotheringham. Does Caravelli know? He told Myers. What about Haynes? Burton told him. Did he ask O'Leary? According to Lipton. Why? Was he talking to Patterson? Or Harris? Does he know Draper? And Gleason? Gleason? Gleason. He knows Douglas. Ah, Douglas, says Phillips. That explains it. Once upon a time on a dark and stormy night there is a knock at the door. It is a belated letter from Habibi. She wishes she could wrap her breath in feathers for me. She wishes the sun cogs of Newton could be rewound. She sends me two things, a lock of her hair and a drop of her blood on a blue handkerchief. Only we two know the meaning of the blue handkerchief. Once upon a time on a dark and stormy night there is a knock at the door. When I open it, everything outside is sunny. The birds are singing, the lambs are frolicking silly in the meadow. But when I close the door, the night is dark and stormy again. It's one of those new dual system doors. Will take a bit of adjusting. I sit down with the instructions. Look at this, honey, I complained to my wife. 15 different languages, but none of them is coherent. Once upon a time on a dark and stormy night, there was a knock at the door. It woke me up. There was a man standing there. He says to me, "You're asleep." I say I was until he knocked on the door. "No," he says, "you're still asleep." I go and check in the bedroom. "So I am," I say. "So who are you?" "I'm the knock at the door that lets you know you're dreaming," he says. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there's a knock at the door. Shelley looks out the window through the curtains. It's Brian. "Go away," she calls out. "Shelley, baby," he calls back. "It's cold out here." She lets him in, but she regrets it. He wants to continue the argument. He wants her to say he is right. She does. She regrets it. Years later, she is thinking, I should never have agreed he was right. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there's a knock at the door. It's a guy with a pizza. "Hey lady," he says, "did you order the pepperoni pizza?" "Well, here's the pepperoni." And he undoes his trousers. "I think you're looking for the lady over the road," she says. "It is a specialised service, your favourite porn movie premise recreated at your door." The pizza guy is apologetic. "I'm really sorry, lady," he says. She looks at him and says he deserves a spanking. It is the movie where his brutish advances are rejected, but when he is wounded and remorseful, she drags him inside and treats him like a little boy. Once upon a time on a dark and stormy night there is a knock at the door. When Bill opens it, there is a man in a bad way. "Storm chasers," he pants, collapsing. He and his team had chased the storm all the way to Bill's place. Then the storm stopped, turned around, picked them up and smashed them into a road sign. 3 of his colleagues are dead. but they have some spectacular footage. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. It is the king of dark and stormy nights. He is looking for his queen. On stormy nights, she rises from her bed and goes wandering, putting on many disguises. Might one of her disguises be the king of dark and stormy nights, I wonder? He just smiles. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. We are hurriedly packing before the missiles arrive. The officer at the door has other orders. Stay put, he says. The enemy is only bluffing. We suddenly realise we are dead men, and we've been working for psychopaths. Once upon a time, on a dark and stormy night, there is a knock at the door. Nevermore the reckless hand. It came as a knock, strong and steady. Let me guess. Is that you, Betty? It is Betty, back from the gibbering dead, no longer the frazzled Daisy. The funeral is over. All the people who should be in jail are in jail. The quick trip to Suva was a risk. You look more relaxed than I've seen you in years, I say. She lights a cigarette. If I was any more relaxed, she says, I'd be in a coma. The cool serotonin Comedown.